In this video, we're going to talk about three laws. We're going to talk about the zero law, the power of one rule, and we're going to deal with negative exponents as well. So the zero rule. The zero rule says any non-zero base, keeping in mind the base cannot be zero. So right here, this is n is the base, which stands for any number. It cannot be zero. But it says that for any non-zero base raised to the power of zero, your answer equals 1. So it does not matter what this number is. That's why we put it as n. It can be any number. If the exponent is 0, it equals 1. So any base raised to the power of 0 always gives me the answer of 1. So let's see some examples of that. The base in this example is 4 raised to the power of 0, so it equals 1. And then again, in brackets, the 0 applies to what's in brackets. So it doesn't matter what's in brackets. The rule states any base raised to the power of 0. So the base is negative 15, which doesn't matter. It's raised to the power of 0, so it's positive 1. The next example, any base raised to the power of 0 gives me 1, but on the outside there's a negative. So this negative comes over, and your answer becomes negative 1. Once again, any base raised to the power of 0 gives me 1. I'm not even going to worry about what's in the brackets. I know it gives me 1. Why would we use this? There's a couple of reasons why we would use this. Mostly, we were going to use this when we're trying to write out this in base 10. So to write these in base 10s as we did before, this would be 4 times 1,000, which is 4 times 10 to the power of 3. Because using powers of 10, we have to have the base of 10. And then all these other ones follow suit. But 5 is 5 times 1. The question says we have to use base 10. So we know any number raised to the power of 0 gives me 1. And over here, 5 times 1 is 5. But I can't write it as 5 times 1. I have to write it as 5 times 10 to the power of something. That's what powers of 10 mean. 5 times 10 to the power of 0 is the exact same thing as saying 5 times 1. And this is an example why we need to use the zero exponent law when we're writing it out in powers of 10. The powers of 1 rule. Any number raised to the power of 1 equals itself. So this is pretty self-explanatory. This is n, any number raised to the power of 1 gives me n. 8 raised to the power of 1 gives me 8. And that's not as important as if we go backwards. 8 is the exact same thing as saying 8 to the power of 1. And any number without an exponent means that number to the power of 1. This does sound like a silly concept. It seems pretty obvious. However, when we're dealing with polynomials and you're getting variables and it just says, for example, n, you need to know that that's n to the power of 1. Or when you're dealing with multiplication of bases and the bases happen to be 8 or any number, if we don't know that that's the power of 1, we don't add them together when we're multiplying. So it is very essential that we know the power of 1 rule, because we need to know that any number we can write it as the number itself, standard form, and the exponential form of it, just a regular number, is that number raised to the power of 1. The last rule says it's the negative exponent. So what happens when we have a negative exponent up here? Most times we're getting positive exponents for most things. We're getting a positive one there. But there are some times that we do get a negative exponent. Especially when you're doing the division rules of powers and the numerator happens to be less than the denominator. You're going to get a negative number on the bottom. So what we do now is the rule says if we have a negative exponent, all we do is we get rid of that negative sign, we drop it, and we write it over 1. So remember that anytime we have a number, we can write it over 1 if we choose to. So essentially this number is 5 over 1 raised to the power of negative 2. Now to get rid of the negative, I just reciprocate 5 over 1 to get 1/5. I bring the 2 down to the bottom, it goes with the 5, and I drop the negative. And now I go 5 squared to get 25. So 1 over 25 is my standard form answer. So again, if I have a negative exponent, I reciprocate to get 1 over 5. I drop the negative, bring the 2 down, and I get 1 over 25 as a standard answer.